Blessed are the men of God. Thank you. Well, after several requests for a few good men, I found some. And some of them were willing to plan for and participate in this morning's worship service. Several of them are listed in your bulletin on page 5, who spent a good deal of time planning much of this service. Paul Winslow baked our communion bread for today. Others are ushering, singing, playing instruments, and serving communion. So as we celebrate the gifts of men this day, it seems like a good time to again look at the story of Abraham, or Abram, as he was first known. And as I look back at the early part of this story, several things stand out for me in this text. One thing I notice is Abram's age. When God calls Abram, when Abram begins this new journey with God, he's 75 years old. Now, given that the scripture tells us Abram's father lived to be 205 years old, and some of his relatives are reported to have lived well beyond 400 years, 75 may seem rather young, but still, Abraham has lived quite a long time already, has been married presumably for decades now, given the customs of the day, has settled in the land of Haran for some time now with his wife, his father, and his nephew. Abram seems to have accumulated a fair amount of wealth by this time. And then God appears on this rather settled scene and says, "Leave this place. Go where I lead you. Live as I direct you. Everyone in the world will be blessed because of your faithful action." Perhaps Abram has the gift of openness to newness, new things, new adventures, new ways of being, because he not only hears God speak, he listens and responds, apparently immediately without asking any questions as far as we know. And Abram becomes a risk-taking leader, moving out when God calls, leading others to respond to God's call to them, and taking many risks along the way. Now, it's significant that Abram hears God's call in the first place. God's words to Abram seem very clear, much clearer than many of us may experience God or come to understand where God is in our lives. So I wondered, how is it that Abram is so in tune to God, able to see God in his life, hear God's clear word to him, know where God is directing him? The text doesn't really tell us, at least not yet. But the text is clear. Abram sees God, hears God, and responds to God's movement in his life. The text is also clear. When God moves in Abram's life, Abram responds, following God's leading, taking on the risks of the unknown, of potential danger, of uncertain times. Now, it's hard enough to respond to God's call, stepping out and trusting God while putting yourself at risk. But notice what else Abram does. He begins the journey as God instructs, leading others with him down this path, taking his wife, his nephew, everyone who is dependent upon them, and taking everything that they own to begin the risky journey with God. A journey full of promise, yes, and also full of danger, with ambiguity looming large. Abram trusts the movement of God in his life so much, he puts at risk not only himself, but everything he owns and everyone who depends upon him. Abram has the gift of listening to God's call in his life, hearing and seeing what God asks of him, responding right away when the call comes. And Abram also has the gift of being a risk-taking leader, stepping out trusting God, taking others along for the experience, caring for them along the way, and leading them also to where God is calling. Now notice, they travel in stages, not a marathon road trip, nonstop to the end point. Remember, Abram doesn't know where he's going, exactly where God is calling. God did not give Abram the final destination so he could just go to MapQuest or Google it, print out some specific directions, know how many miles the trip would be, the estimated time of arrival, and the approximate cost for food to fuel the camels and the donkeys for the whole trip. No, Abram's God just says, leave. Leave your country, leave your people, leave the home of your parents, and go, not to a certain predisposed place, but to a place that I, that is God, will show you. So responding to God's call, Abram sets out on the journey not because he's certain and has everything completely organized and well planned, but maybe because Abram has the gift of being able to live with ambiguity.